students. So today we are going to learn about a very important topic of class 11, which is cell cycle and cell division. Students, we all know that growth and reproduction are two very important processes of all living organisms. Starting from a prokaryote till the highest and the most evolved eukaryotes, all living organisms, we show these two particular characteristics, very important characteristics, that is growth and reproduction. So likewise, you can imagine that since cells are the building blocks of all living organisms, so cells also show these two processes, that is growth and reproduction. So now what is growth? All of us know what is growth, right? Ever since we were born, we have been growing till a certain age. You must have seen children, you must have seen babies when they are born, they are very small, they fit into your laps and gradually they keep growing taller and bigger and bigger. So this is what is growth, which happens not only visibly but also the cells inside our body. So all the cells, they grow and after a certain point of time they reproduce. In other words, they divide. So this is exactly what our topic today is, that is cell cycle and cell division. But you have to keep in mind one thing, that the job of a cell is not just to divide, right? It has other activities in its life as well before it divides. So during its entire journey, its entire course of life, it performs certain activities and then finally it reproduces. And all this happens in a very regulated, in a very controlled manner. It is not that any cell can divide at any point of time. Everything is regulated by certain systems in the body. Okay? So today what we are going to learn about is what is the cell cycle. We will come to this one by one. Okay, let us learn about what is the cell cycle. What is cell cycle? Well, cell cycle means it is the entire journey of a cell till the time it is born, till it divides into two daughter cells. So let's say it is the life of a cell. And if somebody asks you to define what it is, how will you define a cell cycle? What is the definition of a cell cycle? The definition of a cell cycle is, it is a regulated and ordered sequence of events starting from cell growth, duplication of its genome, synthesis of important components till it divides into two genetically identical daughter cells. Quite a big definition, and remember there are certain very important keywords which you must know to write the definition completely. So it is a regulated and ordered sequence. That means there is a control on the cell cycle. somebody is controlling the cell cycle, and it happens in an ordered sequence. That means there is a particular sequence in which the events occur one after the other in the cell cycle. So where does it start from? When the cell is born, then the cell grows in size. So first thing is the growing period. After growing, what happens? It duplicates its genome. That means whatever DNA is present in it, it will make it double. So it duplicates the genome, synthesizes important components, various other components which would be required eventually to make another cell, and then finally it divides into two identical daughter cells, into two genetically identical daughter cells. So it's a regulated and ordered sequence starting from cell growth. This is where it starts. The cell starts growing, then its genome is duplicated. That means the DNA undergoes replication or the DNA undergoes doubling. Then important components are synthesized, and finally it divides into two genetically identical daughter cells. It divides into two genetically identical daughter cells. All this will be very clear to you once we have seen what the cell cycle is. So for seeing that, let us see the. So these are the various phases of the cell cycle. That means it is the entire life of a cell. This shows you the entire life of a cell. So the entire life of a cell, which is called the cell cycle, it can be divided. It can be divided into various phases. The first phase which you see over here is the G1 phase. The first phase which you see, over here is the G1 phase or the gap 1 phase. This is followed by the S phase or the synthesis phase, then the G2 phase or the gap 2 phase, and finally here we have the M phase. This is the phase of cell division where the cell undergoes mitosis and gives rise to two daughter cells. You also find a G0 phase over here. We will come into that one by one as we see what are these four phases. But before we go into the discussion of each of these phases separately, do you know the person or maybe the scientist who discovered the entire sequence of events? So the credit of that goes to two French scientists. The credit goes to two French scientists, Prevost and Dumas. In the year 1824, they discovered the sequence of events of the cell cycle when they were working on the zygote formation in frogs. When they were working about the zygote formation in frogs, they discovered the cell cycle and they actually gave the entire sequence of events of the cell cycle. So we will now see what are the different sequence of events. We are going into the broad picture of the cell cycle, which was discovered by Prevost and Dumas in 1824. Now, here what happens is, the first phase which you see is the longest phase of the cell cycle. It is the longest phase of the cell cycle, and this is called the G1 phase, or this is also called the growth phase 1. We will see the features of each of these later on. This one is called the S phase or the synthetic phase. As the name suggests, something is made over here, something is synthesized over here. This is called the G2 phase or the growth phase 2. And finally, this entire phase, starting from here to here, this is known as the M phase, or it is called the mitotic phase, or it is also called the phase of cell division. It is called the phase of cell division. Okay, so these are the various phases that we have. First one is the G1 phase. As you can see in the picture, it is the longest phase. It is the longest phase, followed by the synthetic phase, then a small phase called the G2 phase, and finally the mitotic phase. So this is the entire life of the cell of any living organism. Now, if I consider it to be a human cell, in a human cell, the life of a human cell is for 24 hours. A cell in a human being lives for 24 hours, and after 24 hours it has split into two cells. So if I consider this to be the cell cycle of a human cell, then the growth phase, this lasts for approximately 11 hours. The synthetic phase lasts for approximately 8 hours. The growth phase lasts for 4 hours. So 11 plus 8 is 19 plus 4 is 23. Only 1 hour is given for the phase of cell division. So you will see when we come to cell division, it is a very complicated process. But that process is allotted only 1 hour in the cell cycle. The remaining part, which is the G1 phase, S phase and the G2 phase, they take up 23 hours. That means the entire process is spent in preparing for cell division. So this entire phase, that means the G1 phase, S phase and the G2 phase put together, the G1 phase plus S phase plus the G2 phase put together is called the interphase. It is called the interphase. That means cell cycle has an interphase, as this diagram shows you, and it has a mitotic phase. Okay? Now, moving on to the characteristics of the different phases. Let us see what are the characteristics of the different phases. The first phase, which is called the G1 phase or the growth phase number 1, the characteristics, as the name suggests, it is a growing phase where the cell is growing in size. So the first point is that the cell grows bigger. First characteristics, the cell is metabolically active. Metabolically active means the cell performs all other functions. Only thing is, it is not doubling its DNA content. The DNA content in the cell remains the same, but the cell is performing all other activities. Hence, it is metabolically active. What else does it do? It accumulates different proteins that would be required for cell division. Okay, so these are the basic characteristics of the G1 phase. Now this is followed by the S phase or the synthetic phase. So as the name suggests, here the actual synthesis of DNA is going to take place. That means whatever DNA was there in the cell, the amount of DNA is going to be doubled. More DNA is going to be made so that the amount of DNA becomes double. And since more DNA is getting made, it is getting synthesized. Hence, this phase is also called the synthesis phase or the synthetic phase. Here what happens? The cell growth stops. The cell does not grow anymore. The cell continues to be metabolically active. It continues to perform other functions also. Most importantly, here DNA undergoes replication. That means DNA becomes double. So this can also be said to be the DNA doubling phase. But remember, in this phase, although the number of DNA is doubling, the number of chromosomes is not doubling in number. So that means if you consider this to be the cell cycle of a human cell, we all know that we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. So at the end of the S phase, the number of chromosomes will remain the same. Only thing is the amount of DNA in them will double. So if I consider the amount, how do you denote the number of chromosomes? We represent it by N, right? So at the end of DNA replication phase or at the end of N phase, the number of chromosomes will remain the same. That means if it is a diploid cell, then the number of chromosomes will be the same. 2N will continue to be 2N. But if the amount of DNA was 2C in the cell, then now the amount of DNA will become 4C. Remember, we use small letter, small n for denoting the number of chromosomes and capital C for denoting the amount of DNA. So since it is a synthetic phase, at the end of the synthetic phase, the amount of DNA will double, but the number of chromosomes will remain the same. Now moving on to the G2 phase. Let us move on to the G2 phase. Now synthesis of DNA is over. DNA synthesis has happened. The DNA has doubled. What will happen? Now the cell continues to grow. The cell continues to grow. The cell is again metabolically active. And what else happens? Now, the various organelles, they duplicate. Different organelles of the cell, they duplicate because a new cell is going to be formed. Soon after this, we are going to go into the phase of cell division where a new cell is going to be created. So you need organelles for that cell also. That is why over here, the other organelles, they will all start doubling so that the new set of organelles can pass on to the daughter cells. Okay, so here the organelles duplicate. Very importantly, the phase of cell division is very, very important. Energy is very important for the phase of cell division. It's a highly energy requirement process. So ATP is produced and stored in the cell in this phase, because ATP or energy is going to be required for the later phase of cell division, which is a highly energy demanding phase. Okay, so these are basically the different characteristics or the different features of the three phases of the interphase. So what have we learned? We have learned about the three sub-phases of interphase, and those three sub-phases are G1 phase, S phase and the G2 phase. This makes up the interphase part of the cell division. Now, if you have seen this diagram carefully, coming back to this diagram carefully, there is also something called a G0 phase. If you have seen this diagram carefully, there is also something called a G0 phase, and see under that is written the resting phase. So what is this G0 phase? Now there are certain cells in our body, say for example the liver cells or the heart muscle cells, or say for example the neurons. All these cells, in all these cells, what happens is as soon as they enter into the G1 phase, after the G1 phase, they pass out into the G0 phase. They do not enter the later phases. That means they do not, like the other cells, they don't enter into the S phase, but they remain arrested. Their growth remains arrested at the G1 phase, and they pass into another phase which is called the G0 phase. So we can say that for such cells, the cell cycle has come to a halt. The cell cycle has stopped, maybe for the time being or maybe permanently. Now, if it is the heart muscle cells or the nerve cells, then they remain in the G0 phase permanently. So they are permanently in the G0 phase. They are permanently in the G0 phase, whereas the liver cells, they remain temporarily in the G0 cells. but the liver cells, they remain temporarily in the G0 phase, because liver cells, they can be called as per the demand of the body, and they may start dividing once again. In other words, they may start from the G0 phase as per the requirement of the body. They can enter into the S phase and then go to the G2 phase and then go into the phase of cell division and continue the cell division process. But that is only in case of liver cells as per the need of the body. So we say that the liver cells are in the G0 phase temporarily, whereas the heart muscle cells and the neurons, once they have gone into the G1 cells, then they enter into the G0 cells and they do not undergo division any further throughout the lifetime of an individual. Now, you've seen, so let us just quickly go back to this phase once again. So, you see, this is the entire cell cycle. It is happening in a very regulated manner. If you remember the definition, we had used the word regulated and ordered process. So, we're coming back to this slide once again. And if you remember that when we were writing the definition, we had mentioned two important words. That is, it is a very ordered and a regulated sequence of events. So you see the order in which they are progressing, and of course it is following a particular pattern or a particular sequence. But who is controlling it? Is there anything which controls? Does this have a checkpoint? Does something which goes on for 11 hours, only after 11 hours will the cell pass into the synthetic phase? Then in the synthesis, which will take 8 hours, after that it will pass on to the growth phase, which will take 4 hours, and then the dividing phase for 1 hour. Who is regulating this complete sequence of events in all the cells of the organism? Do we have controls? Do we have checkpoints? Yes, we do have. So students, you have seen, if I come back to this picture once again, you have seen that the G1 phase lasts for 11 hours. Then the synthetic phase lasts for 8 hours, followed by the G2 phase, which lasts for 4 hours, and finally the phase of cell division, which lasts for 1 hour. So who is regulating this? Where is the control system? Do we have a control system? Is there a checkpoint which sees how long the G1 phase lasts before the cell passes into the next phase, and likewise for all the phases? Yes, we indeed have certain checkpoints. And these checkpoints are nothing but two proteins. These are cyclins and cyclin dependent kinases, CDKs. So these are the two proteins which regulates the entire process. Not only that, they not only regulate the process of cell cycle, they also keep checking for errors. Because you know, when a DNA is copying and becoming double, when it makes a copy of itself, there can be errors in the DNA. And these errors can subsequently lead to several complications. That is why these errors are deleted by these checkpoints. So the checkpoints not only control the manner in which the cell cycle is progressing, but it also controls and minimizes the errors that might be happening in the entire process of cell cycle. Now moving on to a very important part, which is the previous year's questions, the frequently asked questions, and the other important questions which we have. So reading on the first one, which phase of the cell cycle is the longest? Is it the G1 phase, G2 phase, S phase, or the G0 phase? This, if you see, has appeared in the NEET examination of 2023. Then we have another question from NEET 2021. In which phase does DNA replication occur? In which phase of cell cycle does DNA replication occur? So these are the two questions which I have picked up from the latest years. And as you know, which phase of cell cycle is the longest? Of course, it is the G1 phase because the G1 phase lasts for approximately 11 hours. Next, in which phase does DNA replication occur? So DNA replication occurs in the S phase because S stands for synthesis, and S phase is the synthetic phase where DNA is newly synthesized. Then this is from NEET 2018. The stage between two successive M phase is called what? The stage between two successive M phase. That means a cell when it starts dividing till the time the daughter cells again start dividing. So what is that phase called? It is called the interphase. Why? Because interphase is nothing but it is all the three phases, G1 phase, S phase and the G2 phase put together. That is the interphase. Now this is a question from the NCERT exemplar. Very important question both for boards as well as for NEET. That is, a cell enters the phase of cell division but stops after the first phase. That means after the G1 phase. Name the phase of cell division it has completed and the phase it has entered. So you have to mention two phases over here. One is the phase which it has passed and the phase where it has stopped. It has not gone on to the subsequent phases. Okay. So what is going to be the answer? The first answer, name the phase of cell division it has completed. What has it completed? It has completed the G1 phase. And the phase which it has now entered is the G0 phase. Why? Because the cell division has stopped. It is not because the word clearly mentions that the cell cycle has come to a halt. That means after the G1 phase, it has moved to the G0 phase and is not going to divide any further. If it is a heart muscle cell or if it is a neuron, and it could divide again if required by the body if it happens to be a liver cell. Okay, so with that we have come to the end of the session. Thank you very much. So with that we have come to the end of the session. If you want, you can contact me at my email ID, which is Shupriya B. Ganguly at TIGPS.in. You can, whatever doubts you have, if you want to ask questions, if you want explanation on something, please mention it. Get in touch with me on my email ID which is there on the top. In the next video, we will learn about the phase of cell division. That means here we are going to learn about mitosis and then into meiosis in the subsequent videos. Thank you. Have a nice day.